Hello and welcome to this Tuesday, August 27th, 2019 episode of the Law of Success Mastermind. Now, today's episode is enthusiasm out of the Law of Success. We just read Control Your Enthusiasm in Keys to Success, and now we're on Law of Success to go deeper into this. Lesson 6, Enthusiasm. You can do it if you believe you can. Enthusiasm is a state of mind that inspires and arouses one to put action into the task at hand. It does more than this. It is contagious and vitally affects not only the enthusiast, but all with whom he comes in contact. Enthusiasm bears the same relationship to a human being that steam does to the locomotive. It is the vital moving force that impels action. The greatest leaders of men are those who know how to inspire enthusiasm in their followers. Enthusiasm is the most important factor entering into salesmanship. It is, by far, the most vital factor that enters into public speaking. If you wish to understand the difference between a man who is enthusiastic and one who is not, compare Billy Sunday with the average man of his profession. The finest sermon, over-delivered, would fall upon deaf ears if it were not backed with enthusiasm by the speaker. How enthusiasm will affect you. Mix enthusiasm with your work and it will not seem hard or monotonous. Enthusiasm will so energize your entire body that you can get along with less than half the usual amount of sleep, and at the same time, it will enable you to perform from 2 to 3 times as much work as you usually perform in a given period without fatigue. For many years, I have done most of my writing at night. One night, while I was enthusiastically at work over my typewriter, I looked out of the window of my study, just across the square from the Metropolitan Tower in New York City, and saw what seemed to be the most peculiar reflection of the moon on the tower. It was of a silvery gray shade, such as I had never seen before. Upon closer inspection, I found that the reflection was that of the early morning sun and not that of the moon. It was daylight. I had been at work all night, but I was so engrossed in my work that the night had passed as though it were but an hour. I worked at my task all that day and all the following night without stopping, except for a small amount of light food. 2 nights and one day without sleep and with but little food, without the slightest evidence of fatigue, would not have been, would not have been possible had I not kept my body energized with enthusiasm over the work at hand. Enthusiasm is not merely a figure of speech. It is a vital force that you can harness and use with profit. Without it, you would resemble an electric battery without electricity. Enthusiasm is the vital force with which you recharge your body and develop a dynamic personality. Some people are blessed with natural enthusiasm, while others must acquire it. The procedure through which it may be developed is simple. It begins by the doing of the work or rendering of the service which one likes best. If you should be so situated that you cannot conveniently engage in the work which you like best for the time being, then you can proceed along another line very effectively by adopting a definite chief aim that contemplates your engaging in that particular work at some future time. Lack of capital and many other circumstances over which you have no immediate control may force you to engage in work which you do not like. But no one can stop you from determining in your own mind what your definite chief aim in life shall be. Nor can anyone stop you from planning ways and means for translating this aim into reality. Nor can anyone stop you from mixing enthusiasm with your plans. Happiness, the final object of all human effort, is a state of mind that can be maintained only through the hope of future achievement. Happiness lies always in the future and never in the past. The happy person is the one who dreams of heights of achievement that are yet unattained. The home you intend to own, the money you intend to earn and place in the bank, the trip you intend to take when you can afford it, the position in life you intend to fill when you have prepared yourself, and the preparation itself. These are the things that produce happiness. Likewise, these are the materials out of which your definite chief aim is formed. These are the things over which you may become enthusiastic, no matter what your present situation in life may be. And that's why InspiredLansing.com is so significant to me. It's truly what makes me enthusiastic. More info is found on Happy Hero Studio, but go to InspiredLansing.com first, and it will guide you to HappyHeroStudio.com. More than 20 years ago, I became enthusiastic over an idea. When the idea first took form in my mind, I was unprepared to take even the first step toward its transformation into reality. But I nursed it in my mind. I became enthusiastic over it as I looked ahead in my imagination and saw the time when I would be prepared to make it a reality. The idea was this: I wanted to become the editor of a magazine based upon the Golden Rule, through which I could inspire people to keep up courage and deal with one another squarely. Finally, my chance came, and on Armistice Day, 1918, I wrote the first editorial for what was to become the material realization of a hope that had lain dormant in my mind for nearly a score of years. With enthusiasm, I poured into that editorial the emotions which I had been developing in my heart over a period of more than 20 years. My dream had come true. My editorship of a national magazine had become a reality. As I have stated, this editorial was written with enthusiasm. I took it to a man of my acquaintance, and with enthusiasm, I read it to him. The editorial ended in these words: "At last, my 20-year-old dream is about to come true. It takes money, and a lot of it, to publish a national magazine, and I haven't the slightest idea where I am going to get this essential factor. But this is worrying me not at all, because I know I am going to get it somewhere." As I wrote those lines, I mixed enthusiasm and faith with them. I had hardly finished reading this editorial when the man to whom I read it, the first and only person to whom I had shown it, said, "I can tell you where you are going to get the money, for I am going to supply it." And he did. Yes, he did. Yes, enthusiasm is a vital force, so vital, in fact, that no man who has it highly developed can begin even to approximate his power of achievement. Before passing to the next step in this lesson, I wish to repeat and to emphasize the fact that you may develop enthusiasm over your definite chief aim in life. No matter whether you are in a position to achieve that purpose at this time or not. You may be a long way from realization of your definite chief aim, but if you will kindle the fire of enthusiasm in your heart and keep it burning Before very long, the obstacles that now stand in the way of your achievement of that purpose will melt away as if by the force of magic, and you will find yourself in possession of power that you did not know you possessed. How your enthusiasm will affect others. We come now to the discussion of one of the most important subjects of this reading course, namely suggestion. In the preceding lessons, we have discussed the subject of autosuggestion, which is self-suggestion. You saw in lesson 2 what an important part autosuggestion played. Suggestion is the principle through which your words and your acts and even your state of mind influence others. That you may comprehend the far-reaching power of suggestion, let me refer you to the introduction, in which the principle of telepathy is described. If you now understand and accept the principle of telepathy, the communication of thought from one mind to another without the aid of signs, symbols, or sounds, as a reality, you, of course, understand why enthusiasm is contagious and why it influences all within its radius. When your own mind is vibrating at a high rate because it has been stimulated with enthusiasm, that vibration registers in the minds of all within its radius, and especially in the minds of those whom you come in close contact. When a public speaker senses the feeling that his audience is en rapport with him, he merely recognizes the fact that his own enthusiasm has influenced the minds of his listeners until their minds are vibrating in harmony with his own. One of the most valuable things any man can learn is the art of using the knowledge and experience of others. When the salesman senses the fact that the psychological moment for closing a sale has arrived, he merely feels the effect of his own enthusiasm as it influences the mind of his prospective buyer and places that mind en rapport, in harmony with his own. The subject of suggestion constitutes so vitally an important part of this lesson and of this entire course that I will now proceed to describe the three mediums through which it usually operates, namely, what you say, what you do, and what you think. When you are enthusiastic over the goods you are selling, or the services you are offering, or the speech you are delivering, your state of mind becomes obvious to all who hear you by the tone of your voice. Whether you have ever thought of it in this way or not, it is the tone in which you make a statement, more than it is the statement itself, that carries conviction or fails to convince. No mere combination of words can ever take the place of a deep belief in a statement that is expressed with burning enthusiasm. Words are but devitalized sounds unless colored with feeling that is born of enthusiasm. Here the printed word fails me, for I can never express with mere type and paper the difference between words that fall from unemotional lips without the fire of enthusiasm back of them, and those which seem to pour forth from a heart that is bursting with eagerness for expression. The difference is there, however. Thus, what you say and the way in which you say it conveys a meaning that must be just the opposite to what is intended. This accounts for many a failure by the salesman who presents his arguments in words which seem logical enough but lack the coloring that can come only from enthusiasm, that is born of sincerity and belief in the goods he is trying to sell. His words said one thing, but the tone of his voice suggested something entirely different. Therefore, no sale was made. That which you say is an important factor in the operation of the principle of suggestion, but not nearly so important as to which you do. Your acts will count for more than your words, and woe unto you if you two fail to harmonize. If a man preach the golden rule as a sound rule of conduct, his words will fall upon deaf ears if he does not practice that which he preaches. The most effective sermon that any man can preach on the soundness of the golden rule is that which he preaches by suggestion when he applies this rule in his relationships with his fellow men. If a salesman of Ford automobiles drives up to his prospective purchaser in a Buick or some other make of car, all the arguments he can present on behalf of the Ford will be without effect. Once I went into one of the offices of the dictaphone company to look at a dictaphone dictating machine. The salesman in charge presented a logical argument as to the machine's merits, while the stenographer at his side was transcribing letters from a shorthand notebook. His arguments in favor of a dictating machine, as compared with the old method of dictating to a stenographer, did not impress me, because his actions were not in harmony with his words. Your thoughts constitute the most important of the three ways in which you apply the principle of suggestion, for the reason that they control the tone of your words, and to some extent at least, your actions. If your thoughts and your actions and your words harmonize, you are bound to influence those with whom you come in contact, more or less toward your way of thinking. We will now proceed to analyze the subject of suggestion and to show you exactly how to apply the principle upon which it operates. As we have already seen, suggestion differs from autosuggestion only in one way. We use it, consciously or unconsciously, when we influence others, while we use autosuggestion as a means of influencing ourselves. Before we can influence another person through suggestion, that person's mind must be in a state of neutrality. That is, it must be open and receptive to your method of suggestion. Right here is where most salesmen fail. They try to make a sale before the mind of the prospective buyer has been rendered receptive or neutralized. This is such a vital point in this lesson that I feel impelled to dwell upon it until there can be no doubt that you understand the principle that I am describing. When I say that the salesman must neutralize the mind of his prospective purchaser before a sale can be made, I mean the prospective purchaser's mind must be credulous. A state of confidence must have been established, and it is obvious that there can be no set rule for either establishing confidence or neutralizing the mind to a state of openness. Here, the ingenuity of the salesman must supply that which cannot be set down as a hard and fast rule. I know a life insurance salesman who sells nothing but large policies, amounting to $100,000 and upward. Before this man even approaches the subject of insurance with a prospective client, he familiarizes himself with the prospective client's complete history, including his education, his financial status, his eccentricities, if he has any, his religious preferences, and other data too numerous to be listed. Armed with this information, he manages to secure an introduction under conditions which permits him to know the prospective client in a social as well as a business way. Nothing is said about the sale of life insurance during his first visit, nor his second visit, and he does not approach the subject of insurance until he has become very well acquainted with the prospective client. All this time, however, he is not dissipating his efforts. he is taking advantage of these friendly visits for the purpose of neutralizing his prospective client's mind. That is, he is building up a relationship of confidence so that when the time comes for him to talk life insurance, that which he says will fall upon ears that willingly listen. Some years ago, I wrote a book entitled How to Sell Your Services. Just before the manuscript went to the publisher, it occurred to me to request some of the well-known men of the United States to write letters of endorsement to be published in the book. The printer was then waiting for the manuscript, therefore I hurriedly wrote a letter to some 8 to 10 men, in which I briefly outlined exactly what I wanted. But the letter brought back no replies. I had failed to observe two important prerequisites for success. I had written the letter so hurriedly that I had failed to inject the spirit of enthusiasm into it, and I had neglected it so to word the letter that it had the effect of neutralizing the minds of those to whom it was sent. Therefore, I had not paved the way for the application of the principle of suggestion. After I discovered my mistake, I then wrote a letter that was based upon strict application of the principle of suggestion. And this letter not only brought back replies from all to whom it was sent, but many of the replies were masterpieces and served far beyond my fondest hopes as valuable supplements to the book. For the purpose of comparison, to show you how the principle of autosuggestion may be used in writing a letter, and what an important part of enthusiasm plays in giving the written word flesh, the two letters are here reproduced. It will not be necessary to indicate which letter failed, as that will be quite obvious. Okay. My dear Mr. Ford, I am just completing a manuscript for a new book entitled How to Sell Your Services. I anticipate the sale of several 100,000 of these books, and I believe those who purchase the book would welcome the opportunity of receiving a message from you as the best method of marketing personal services. Would you therefore be good enough to give me a few minutes of your time by writing a brief message to be published in my book? This will be a big favor to me personally, and I know it would be appreciated by the readers of the book. Thanking you in advance for any consideration you may care to show me, I am yours very truly, Honorable Thomas R. Marshall, Vice President of the United States, Washington, D.C. My dear Mr. Marshall, would you care for the opportunity to send a message of encouragement and possibly a word of advice to a few 100,000 of your fellow men who have failed to make their mark in the world as successfully as you have done? I have completed a manuscript for a book to be entitled How to Sell Your Services. The main point made in the book is that service rendered is cause and the pay envelope is a fact, and that the latter varies in proportion to the efficiency of the former. The book would be incomplete without a few words of advice from a few men who, like yourself, have come up from the bottom to enviable positions in the world. Therefore, if you will write me of your views as to the most essential points to be borne in mind by those who are offering personal services for sale, I will pass your message on through my book, which will ensure its getting into hands where it will do a world of good for a class of earnest people who are struggling to find their places in the world's work. I know you are a busy man, Mr. Marshall, but please bear in mind that by simply calling in your secretary and dictating a brief letter, you will be sending forth an important message to possibly 500,000 people. In money, this will not be worth to you the 2-cent stamp that you will place on the letter. But if estimated from the viewpoint of the good it may do others who are less fortunate than yourself, it may be worth the difference between success and failure to many a worthy person who will read your message, believe in it, and be guided by it. Very cordially yours. Now, let us analyze the two letters and find out why one failed in its mission while the other succeeded. This analysis should start with one of the most important fundamentals of salesmanship, namely motive. In the first letter, it is obvious that the motive is entirely one of self-interest. The letter states exactly what is wanted, but the wording of it leaves a doubt as to why the request is made or whom it is intended to benefit. Study the sentence in the second paragraph. This will be a big favorite to me personally, etc. Now, it may seem to be a peculiar trait, but the truth is that most people will not grant favors just to please others. If I ask you to render a service that will benefit me without bringing you some corresponding advantage, you will not show much enthusiasm in granting that favor. You may refuse altogether if you have a plausible excuse for refusing. But if I ask you to render a service that will benefit a third person, even though the service must be rendered through me, and if that service is of such a nature that it is likely to reflect credit on you, the chances are that you will render the service willingly. We see this psychology demonstrated by the man who pitches a dime to the beggar on the street, or perhaps refuses even the dime, but willingly hands over $100 or $1,000 to the charity worker who is begging in the name of others. But the most damaging suggestion of all is contained in the last and most important paragraph of the letter, thanking you in advance for any consideration you may care to show me. This sentence strongly suggests that the writer of the letter anticipates a refusal of his request. It clearly indicates lack of enthusiasm. It paves the way for a refusal of the request. There is not one single word in the entire letter that places in the mind of a man to whom it is sent a satisfactory reason why he should comply with the request. On the other hand, he can clearly see that the object of the letter is to secure from him a letter of endorsement that will help sell the book. The most important selling argument, in fact, the only selling argument available in connection with this request, has been lost because it was not brought out and established as the real motive for making the request. This argument was but faintly mentioned in the sentence, I believe those who purchase the book would welcome the opportunity of receiving a message from you as to the best method of marketing personal services. The opening paragraph of the letter violates an important fundamental of salesmanship because it clearly suggests that the object of the letter is to gain some advantage for its writers, and does not even hint at any corresponding advantage that may accrue to the person to whom it is sent. Instead of neutralizing the mind of the recipient of the letter, as it should do, it has just the opposite effect. It causes him to close his mind against all argument that follows. It puts him in a frame of mind that makes it easy for him to say no. It reminds me of a salesman, or perhaps I should say a man who wanted to be a salesman, who once approached me for the purpose of selling me a subscription to the Saturday Evening Post. As he held a copy of the magazine in front of me, he suggested the answer I should make by this question. You wouldn't subscribe for the Post to help me out, would you? Of course, I said no. He had made it easy for me to say no. There was no enthusiasm back of his words, and gloom and discouragement were written all over his face. He needed the commission he would have made on my subscription had I purchased. No doubt about that. But he suggested nothing that appealed to my self-interest motive. Therefore, he lost a sale. But the loss of this one sale was not the sad part of his misfortune. The sad part was that this same attitude was causing him to lose all other sales, which he might have made had he changed his approach. A few weeks later, another subscription agent approached me. She was selling a combination of 6 magazines, one of which was the Saturday Evening Post. But how different was her approach? She glanced at my library table, on which she saw several magazines, then at my book shelves, and exclaimed with enthusiasm, "Oh, I see you are a lover of books and magazines." I proudly pleaded guilty to the charge. Observe the word proudly. Observe the word proudly, for it has an important bearing on this incident. I laid down the manuscript that I was reading when this saleswoman I laid down the manuscript that I was reading when the saleswoman came in, for I could see that she was a woman of intelligence. Just how I came to see this, I will leave to your imagination. The important point is that I laid down the manuscript and actually felt myself wanting to hear what she had to say. With the aid of 11 words, plus a pleasant smile, plus a tone of genuine enthusiasm, she had neutralized my mind sufficiently to make me want to hear her. She had performed her most difficult task with those few words, because I had made up my mind when she was announced that I would keep my manuscript in my hands and thereby convey to her mind, as politely as I could, the fact that I was busy and did not wish to be detained. Being a student of salesmanship and of suggestion, I carefully watched to see what her next move would be. She had a bundle of magazines under her arm, and I expected she would unroll it and begin to urge me to purchase, but she didn't. You will recall that I said she was selling a combination of 6 magazines, not merely trying to sell them. She walked over to my bookshelves, pulled out a copy of Emerson's essays, and for the next 10 minutes she talked about Emerson's essay on compensation, so interestingly that I lost sight of the roll of magazines that she carried. She was neutralizing my mind some more. Incidentally, she gave me a sufficient number of new ideas about Emerson's work to provide material for an excellent editorial. First impressions really do count. Dress to look the part you intend to play in life, but take care not to overdo it. Then she asked me which magazines I received regularly, and after I told her, she smiled as she began to unroll her bundle of magazines and laid them on the table in front of me. She analyzed her magazines one by one and explained just why I should have each of them. The Sunday Evening Post would bring me the cleanest fiction. Literary Digest would bring me the news of the world in condensed form, such as a busy man like myself would demand. The American Magazine would bring me the latest biographies of the men who were leading in business and industry, and so on, until she had covered the entire list. But I was not responding to her argument as freely as she thought I should have. So she slipped me this gentle suggestion. A man of your position is bound to be well informed, and if he isn't, it will show up in his own work. She spoke the truth. Her remark was both a compliment and a gentle reprimand. She made me feel somewhat sheepish because she had taken inventory of my reading matter, and 6 of the leading magazines were not on my list. The 6 that she was selling. Then I began to slip by asking her how much the 6 magazines would cost. She put on the finishing touches of a well presented sales talk by this tactful reply. The cost? Why, the cost of the entire number is less than you receive for a single page of the typewritten manuscript that you had in your hands when I came in. Again, she spoke the truth. And how did she happen to guess so well what I was getting for my manuscript? The answer is she didn't guess. She knew. She made it a part of her business to draw me out tactfully as to the nature of my work, which in no way made me angry. She became so deeply interested in the manuscript which I had laid down when she came in that she actually induced me to talk about it. I'm not saying, of course, that this required any great amount of skill or coaxing, for have I not said that it was my manuscript? In my remarks about that manuscript, I suspect I admitted that I was receiving $250 for the 15 pages. Yes, I am sure I was careless enough to admit that I was being well paid for my work. Perhaps she induced me to make the admission. At any rate, the information was valuable to her, and she made effective use of it at the psychological moment. For all I know, it was a part of her plan to observe carefully all that she saw and heard, with the object of finding out just what my weaknesses were and what I was most interested in discussing. Some salesmen take the time to do this, some do not. She was one of those who did. Yes, she went away with my order for the 6 magazines, also my $12, but that was not all the benefit she derived from the tactful suggestion plus enthusiasm. She got my consent to canvass my office, and before she left, she had 5 other orders from my employees. At no time during her stay did she leave the impression that I was favoring her by purchasing her magazine. Just to the contrary, she distinctly impressed me with the feeling that she was rendering me a favor. This was tactful suggestion. Before we get away from this incident, I wish to make an admission. When she drew me into conversation, she did it in such a way that I talked with enthusiasm. There were 2 reasons for this. She was one of them, and the other one was the fact that she managed to get me to talk about my own work. Of course, I am not suggesting that you should be meddlesome enough to smile at my carelessness as you read this, or that you should gather from this incident the impression that this tactful saleswoman actually led me to talk of my own work for the purpose of neutralizing my mind so that I would listen to her. When she was ready to talk about her magazines, as patiently as she had listened to me. However, if you should be clever enough to draw a lesson from her method, there is no way for me to stop you from doing so. As I have stated, when I talked, I mixed enthusiasm with my conversation. Perhaps I caught the spirit of enthusiasm from this clever saleswoman. When she made that opening remark as she came into my study, yes, I am sure this is where I caught it. And I am just as sure that her enthusiasm was not a matter of accident. She had trained herself to look for something in her prospective purchaser's office, or his work, or his conversation, over which she could express enthusiasm. Remember, suggestion and enthusiasm go hand in hand. I can remember, as though it were yesterday, the feeling that came over me when that would-be salesman pushed that Saturday Evening Post in front of me, as he remarked, "You wouldn't subscribe for the Post to help me out, would you?" His words were chilled. They were lifeless. They lacked enthusiasm. They registered an impression in my mind, but that impression was one of coldness. I wanted to see the man go out at the door at which he had come in. Mind you, I am not naturally unsympathetic, but the tone of his voice, the look on his face, The general bearing suggested that he was there to ask a favor and not to offer one. Suggestion is one of the most subtle and powerful principles of psychology. You are making use of it in all that you do and say and think. But unless you understand the difference between negative suggestion and positive suggestion, you may be using it in such a way that it is bringing you defeat instead of success. Science has established the fact that through the negative use of suggestion, life may be extinguished. Some years ago, in France, a criminal was condemned to death, but before the time for his execution, an experiment was performed on him, which conclusively proved that through the principle of suggestion, death could be produced. The criminal was brought to the guillotine, and his head was placed under the knife. After he had been blindfolded, a heavy, sharp-edged plank was then dropped on his neck, producing a shock similar to that of a sharp-edged knife. Warm water was then gently poured on his neck and allowed to trickle slowly down his spine to imitate the flow of warm blood. In 7 minutes, the doctors pronounced the man dead. His imagination, through the principle of suggestion, had actually turned the sharp-edged plank into a guillotine blade and stopped his heart from beating. In the little town where I was raised, there lived an old lady who constantly complained that she feared death from cancer. During her childhood, she had seen a woman who had cancer, and the sight had so impressed itself upon her mind that she began to look for the symptoms of cancer in her own body. She was sure that every little ache and pain was the beginning of her long looked for symptom of cancer. I have seen her place her hand on her breast and have heard her exclaim, "Oh, I am sure I have cancer growing here. I can feel it." When complaining of this imaginary disease, she always placed her hand on her left breast, where she believed the cancer was attacking her. For more than 20 years, she kept this up. A few weeks ago, she died with cancer in her left breast. If suggestion will actually turn the edge of a plank into a guillotine blade and transform healthy body cells into parasites out of which cancer will develop, can you not imagine what it will do in destroying disease germs if properly directed? Suggestion is the law through which mental healers work what appear to be miracles. I've personally witnessed the removal of parasitic growths known as warts through the aid of suggestion within 48 hours. Half the wrecks that stew life's ocean. If some star had been their guide, but in safety now be riding, but they drifted with the tide. You, the reader of you, the reader of this lesson, can be sent to bed with imaginary sickness of the worst sort in 2 hours' time or less through the use of suggestion. If you should start down the street and 3 or 4 people in whom you had confidence should meet you and each exclaim that you look ill, you will be ready for a doctor. This brings to mind an experience that I once had with a life insurance salesman. I had made application for a policy, but was undecided as to whether I would take $10,000 or $20,000. Meanwhile, the agent had sent me to the life insurance company's doctor to be examined. The following day, I was called back for another examination. The second time, the examination was more searching, and the doctor carried a worried look on his face. The third day, I was called back again, and this time to consult the examination. Next day, the agent called on me as follows. They do not wish to alarm you, but the doctors who examined you do not agree on your analysis. You have not yet decided whether you will take $10,000 or $20,000 worth of insurance, and I do not think it is fair for me to give you a report on your medical examination until you make this decision. Because if I did, you might feel that I was urging you to take the larger amount. Then I spoke up and said, well, I have already decided to take the full amount. True enough, I had decided to take the full $20,000 policy. I decided the moment the agent planted the suggestion in my mind that perhaps I had some constitutional weakness that would make it hard for me to get as much insurance as I wanted. Very well, said the agent. Now that you have decided, I feel it my duty to tell you that two of the doctors believe you have the tubercular germ in your system, while the other two disagree with them. The trick had been turned. Clever suggestion had pushed me over the fence of indecision, and we were all satisfied. Where does enthusiasm come in, do you ask? Never mind. It came in, all right. But if you wish to know who brought it, you will have to ask the life insurance agency and his 4 medical accomplices, for I am sure that they must have had a hearty laugh at my expense. But the trick was all right. I needed the insurance anyway. Of course, if you happen to be a life insurance agent, you will not grab this idea and work it out on your next prospective agent who is slow in making his mind about taking a policy. Of course you will not. A few months ago, I received one of the most effective pieces of advertising I ever saw. It was a neat little book in which a clever automobile insurance salesman had reprinted press dispatches that he had gathered from all over the country, in which it was shown that 65 automobiles had been stolen in a single day. On the back page of the book was this highly suggestive statement. Your car may be the next one to go. Is it insured? At the bottom of the page was the salesman's name and address, also his telephone number. Before I had finished reading the first 2 pages of the book, I called the salesman on the phone and made inquiry about rates. He came right over to see me, and you know the remainder of the story. Go back now to the 2 letters and let us analyze the second one, which brought the desired replies from all to whom it was sent. Study carefully the first paragraph, and you will observe that it asks a question which can be answered in but one way. Compare this opening paragraph with that of the first letter by asking yourself which of the 2 would have impressed you most favorably. This paragraph is worded as it is for a twofold purpose. First, it is intended to serve the purpose of neutralizing the mind of the reader, so he will read the remainder of the letter in an open-minded attitude. And second, it asks a question which can be answered in but one way, for the purpose of committing the reader to a viewpoint which harmonizes with the nature of the service that he is to be requested to render in subsequent paragraphs of the letter. In the second lesson of this course, you observed that Andrew Carnegie refused to answer my question when I asked him to what he attributed his success, until he had asked me to define the word success. He did this to avoid misunderstanding. The first paragraph of the letter we are analyzing is so worded that it states the object of the letter and at the same time practically forces the reader to accept that object as being sound and reasonable. Any person who would answer the question asked in this paragraph of the letter under discussion in the negative would by the same answer convict himself on the charge of selfishness. And no man wants to face himself with a guilty conscience on such a charge. Just as the farmer first plows his ground, then fertilizes it, and perhaps harrows it and prepares it to receive the seed, in order that he may be sure of a crop, so does this paragraph fertilize the mind of the reader and prepare it for the seed which is to be placed there through the subtle suggestion that the paragraph contains. Study carefully the second paragraph of the letter, and you will observe that it carries a statement of fact which the reader can neither question nor deny. It provides him with no reason for argument because it is obviously based upon a sound fundamental. It takes him the second step of the psychological journey that leads straight toward compliance with the request that is carefully clothed and covered up in the third paragraph of the letter. But you will notice that the third paragraph begins by paying the reader a nice little compliment that was not designed to make him angry. Therefore, if you will write me of your views as to the most essential points to be borne in mind by those who are offering personal services for sale, etc., study the wording of this sentence together with the setting in which it has been placed, and you will observe that it hardly appears to be a request at all. And certainly, there is nothing about it to suggest that the writer of the letter is requesting a favor for his personal benefit. At most, it can be construed merely as a request for a favor for others. Now, study the closing paragraph and notice how tactfully concealed is the suggestion that if the reader should refuse the request, he is placing himself in the awkward position of one who does not care enough about those who are less fortunate than himself to spend a 2-cent stamp and a few minutes of time for their benefit. From start to finish, the letter conveys its strong impressions by mere suggestion. Yet this suggestion is so carefully covered that it is not obvious except upon careful analysis of the entire letter. The whole construction of the letter is such that if the reader lays it aside without complying with the request, without the request it makes, he will have to reckon with his own conscience. This effect is intensified by the last sentence of the last paragraph, and especially by the last 13 words of the sentence. Who will read last 13 words of that sentence? Who will read your message, believe in it, and be guided by it? This letter brings the reader up with a bang and turns his own conscience into an ally of the writer. It corners him just as the hunter might corner a rabbit by driving it into a carefully prepared net. The best evidence that this analysis is correct is the fact that the letter brought replies from every person to whom it was sent, despite the fact that every one of these men was of the type that we speak of as being a man of affairs, the type that is generally supposed to be too busy to answer a letter of this nature. Not only did the letter bring the desired replies, but the men to whom it was sent replied in person, with the exception of the late Theodore Roosevelt, who replied under the signature of a secretary. Conceit is a fog which envelops one's real character beyond his own recognition. It weakens his native ability and strengthens all his inconsistencies. John Wanamaker and Frank A. Vanderlip wrote 2 of the finest letters I have ever read, each a masterpiece that might well have adorned the pages of a more dignified volume than the one for which the letters were requested. Andrew Carnegie also wrote a letter that was well worth consideration by all who have personal services for sale. William Jennings Bryan wrote a fine letter as did also the late Lord Northcliffe. None of these men wrote merely to please me, for I was unknown to all of them, with the exception of 4. They did not write to please me, they wrote to please themselves and to render a worthy service. Perhaps the wording of the letter had something to do with this, but as to that, I make no point other than to state that all of these men whom I have mentioned, and most others of their type, are generally the most willing men to render service for others when they are properly approached. I wish to take advantage of this appropriate opportunity to state that all of the really big men whom I have had the pleasure of knowing have been the most willing and courteous men of my acquaintance when it came to rendering service that was of benefit to others. Perhaps that was one reason why they were really big men. The human mind is a marvelous piece of machinery. One of its outstanding characteristics is noticed in the fact that all impressions which reach it, either through outside suggestion or out of suggestion, are recorded together in groups which harmonize in nature. The negative impressions are stored away, all in one portion of the brain, while the positive impressions are stored in another portion. When one of these impressions or past experiences is called into the conscious mind through the principle of memory, there is a tendency to recall with it all others of a similar nature, just as the raising of one link of a chain brings up other links with it. For example, anything that causes a feeling of doubt to arise in a person's mind is sufficient to call forth all of his experiences which caused him to become doubtful. If a man is asked by a stranger to cash a check, immediately he remembers having cashed checks that were not good, or of having heard of others who did so. Through the law of association, all similar emotions, experiences, and sense of impressions that reach the mind are filed away together, so that the recalling of one has a tendency to bring back to memory all the others. To arouse a feeling of distrust in a person's mind has a tendency to bring to the surface every doubt-building experience that person ever had. For this reason, successful salesmen endeavor to keep away from the discussion of subjects that may arouse the buyer's chain of doubt impressions, which he has stored away by reason of previous experiences. The successful salesman quickly learns that knocking a competitor or a competing article may result in bringing to the buyer's mind certain negative emotions growing out of previous experiences, which may make it impossible for the salesman to neutralize the buyer's mind. This principle applies to and controls every sense of impression that is lodged in the human mind. Take the feeling of fear, for example. The moment we permit a single emotion that is related to fear to reach the conscious mind, it calls with it all of its unsavory relations. A feeling of courage cannot claim the attention of the conscious mind, while a feeling of fear is there. One or the other must dominate. They make poor roommates because they do not harmonize in nature. Like attracts like. Every thought held in the conscious mind has a tendency to draw to it other thoughts of a similar nature. You see, therefore, that these feelings, thoughts, and emotions growing out of past experiences, which claim the attention of the conscious mind, are backed by a regular army of supporting soldiers of a similar nature that stand ready to aim them in their work. Interesting. Stand ready to aim those past experiences and whatnot. Ideas, thoughts. Head on over to Inspire Lansing to see what I'm working on. InspireLansing.com. InspireLansing.com. Thank you for listening. We'll start up part 2.